Inside what I can only explain as an incredibly cute little lunchbox is an incredibly powerful diagnostic and programming tool that I think every VAG car owner, Volkswagen, Audi, Seat, Skoda and plenty more, should own. It's called VCDS. It's not quite a dealership specific tool as that's called AUDI, but it's damn well close. It's incredibly powerful, lets you unlock hidden features of your car, and can save you a whole load of money if you're planning on working on your own car too. Inside the case is the adapter itself and its detachable USB cable. Now this is the cheapest version that Rostec, the makers of VCDS, offer, and the reason that this is the cheapest is that it's limited artificially to 3 total VIN numbers. That means you can use it with the advanced functions with 3 separate cars, and you can use it with as many cars as you like for the basic functions like checking fault codes. Now I should also make it clear, if you did want to upgrade this, you can buy the most basic cable and upgrade it to either 10 VINs or unlimited for those extra functions, and you pay Rostec a little bit of extra money and that gets unlocked for you. So let me fire up my laptop, get it connected, and then we'll walk you through the different functions, the different options it has, and just how insanely powerful it is. So once you've connected it to the OBD2 port and to the USB port on your laptop, the cable itself will light up green to know you've got a good connection. You can then open up the software and start to have a look. Now from left to right we have select the individual control module. This is really useful, although we'll talk about more in a second. Auto scan, which is the standard function for checking all of the fault codes just with one click, really useful. There's also the service reminder interval reset, or SRI reset, so when you have that please service me in X days, you can reset that from here. There's also the basic or generic OBD2 functions, applications and program options as well. Now let's take a look at auto scan first, as this is the one that for the majority of people you're probably going to be in most of the time. Now you can hit start and have it do the full scan, but a really nice easy way to get started or just have a glimpse at how well your car's doing, and so it doesn't take too long, is to click the Gateway Installation List button. This will give you a list of all of the different modules in your car and if they have any stored faults in them. In my case, I have a central convenience malfunction and a radio malfunction, both of which I'm well aware of what they are. They're old codes, I should clear them, but I kept them for the sake of showing you for this video. One of them is because I installed a secondary radio box and so it lost communication for a while, and one of them was a bit of a glitch with the fuel filler cap door. Again, all good, but you can see that if they have a fault code, they will show up in red, whereas if they don't have a fault code, they'll show up in black with status OK. You can also click the start button to do the full scan. This gives you way more information, including what the actual fault codes are, but it also takes a lot longer as it has to open up every individual module, search for all of the information, and you might even get some beeps from things like your stability control module or ABS when it's scanning those. And then once it's done all of that, you will get a very long list of all of the different modules, all of the different bits of information that the car has ever saved about them, including all of the fault codes and details about each of them. Now this is going to take a while, so I'm going to leave this to run, but one of the extra nice things is that you can actually save all of that information as well, so that you can check on it later, or maybe get some help from the Rostec forums and a whole lot else. If you want more detailed information about each of the modules that are in your car, then you can select the individual control modules. If you go to the Install tab, which will be there by default, you can see all of the modules that are in your car and check out each one individually. In my case, we're going to look at engine. It will take a second to get all of the information, and then you can see down at the bottom there are 2 sets of options. On the left hand side there are the basic functions. Those ones don't count towards your VIN limit for each of their lower spec cables. And then there are the advanced functions, which are something that you should generally steer clear of if you don't know what you're doing. You can seriously mess up your car, potentially bricking it internally with these options, so be very, very careful. Also, using these options do count towards your 3 VIN limit, so again, keep that in mind. Now the basic options are fairly obvious. You have fault codes, which will show you any stored fault codes. as you might expect, and you can clear them from there as well. And there are a few other things, but the one that I'm most interested in is the advanced measuring blocks. This is where you can see live data for the car. This is an incredibly long list, especially for the ECU, so you will want to use the search bar, and just be aware that certain things might not be named quite what you would expect. In my case, engine RPM is there, but it might be called engine speed instead. There's a few variances, so do keep that in mind. With that said, you can check out each of the sections, you add the checkboxes, and that they will show live data and be refreshing relatively quickly. One of the really cool things though is that you can press the graph button and see all of that data graphed live for you. This is really, really useful for diagnosing little intermittent issues, maybe in certain driving conditions, ideally with a passenger monitoring that for you, but it's really, really useful to have available to you. Moving on to the advanced side of things, this is where it gets dangerous. So again, be careful, know what you're doing before you touch any of this. Now, under basic settings, this is where you can do a lot of basic tests and a few calibrations, resetting adaptations, that sort of thing. In this case, you can test the NOx sensors or oxygen sensors, evap valve test, and a whole lot else. There's a lot of useful stuff. If you go to the transmission control unit, the TCU, in my case, you can do things like adjust the clutch kiss points so that you can, if you've replaced those clutches or maybe you've got a bit of jerky starts, then you can reset those and have it relearn them. There's a lot that you can do, so keep that in mind. And it's also really useful for when you're working on your own car. If you do those sorts of replacements, or in some cars doing things like timing change, you need to have the computer relearn the timing chain length, and so you can do that from here too. Then there's output tests. This is so powerful and so useful. This lets you turn on individual components of the car. You can turn on an individual fuel injector to make sure that that one injector is working fine. You can turn on the fuel pump, and there's just so much you can do with this, and it's so useful from a diagnostic perspective. If you have things like exhaust flaps or exhaust valves in your exhaust, then you can turn those on to make sure that those do actually work. Or if you're trying to diagnose specific issues, from here you can turn on that component to make sure that it works. Even things like lighting, you can turn on individual lights, you can send specific signals to the lights to do different functions, and so it's so useful for diagnosis. Then, and honestly this is the most dangerous option, there is coding. Now this is called long coding because, well, it's a pretty long string and there's a number of different options here that you may or may not be aware of. You can go to the long coding helper and this will tell you what each of the various bits do. So in my case, the 12-bit means, or hex code value, means that this is an Audi, it's an Avant, and it's a European rest of the world market. Technically, you can change these values, but again, be very careful with what you're doing here because you can break a lot about your car here. There are also obviously other bits that you can cycle through. In my case, if for some reason you wanted to remove the 7-speed dual clutch gearbox, you can swap that transmission and tell the car what it's been swapped to. And there's a load of different options here. I would cycle through them so you can see. Electric work pump is not installed. I can guarantee that. There's even things like trailer and suspension leveling. That's pretty sweet. Obviously right-hand drive, all-wheel drive, since it's the S4. Start-stop is installed, although it is a bit temperamental. And a whole load of other stuff that you can walk through as well. It's incredibly useful, it's incredibly powerful, and I really don't want to touch many of these things myself. Then there's adaptations. This is the specific list of adaptations that you can adjust. Things like in the engine ECU, or the ECU itself, you can do things like idle RPM correction. If your engine idle is sitting too high, you can help correct that. Activate start-stop is also really useful if you maybe don't have start-stop, but you've, say, installed a nice AGM battery and you want that to be available, that's possible. And a whole load of other things depending what control module you're in. And finally, there is security access. Now, some functions and some features of this, some modules will not read out data or let you, run those functions without a security access code. Some of those codes are publicly known, but the majority of them aren't, and apparently a lot of dealerships don't even know the code specifically. You have to call up a specific helpline to get them, and it's generally best that you leave these sorts of functions to the professionals, the people who would actually, or who are meant to know those security codes. But if you're very dedicated, you might be able to find them. And lastly, there is the SRI reset function, which is really useful for if you've just done a service, you've got your, service warning light coming up, you can reset that from here. There are a whole load of options that you can choose from in terms of what resets to do, and you might need to have a play around with them to work out which one is right for you. Obviously, your specific region is where you would want to activate those, but you can also see all of the current values for all of those resets and stuff like that. Even one of the interesting ones was the day counter, which I worked out is the day since manufacture, which means that my car is nearly 3,000 days old. So that's a brief look and a bit of a showcase of VCDS. It's a tool that I highly recommend you pick up if you're planning on working on your own VW or Audi or Skoda Seat car. It is incredibly useful, it's incredibly powerful, will let you activate functions that you have saved in your car but maybe didn't pay for, or the original owner didn't pay for when they spec'd it, and it will let you do things like, if you were to add in functions, in my case, I don't have power folding mirrors, but if I were to add those motors in, run the wiring, I could activate that from VCDS. And the fact that it's not the most expensive tool on the planet means that it's pretty accessible for most people to use, and even for things like, as I've already shown, the battery coding. If you replace your battery in a relatively new car, you generally have to code that new battery in, and coding or going to an Audi dealer to do that for you can be hundreds of pounds, whereas just buying the standard battery and doing it yourself can be, well, in my case, 160 or so pounds instead of like 400. So I've already reclaimed the value of VCDS just by doing a single battery swap. So that's a look at VCDS. If you're interested or have any questions or suggestions for things that I should cover in the future, including with VCDS, do feel free to leave those in the comments down below. There is also that subscribe button if you want to check out more videos like this one on a weekly basis, and hopefully I'll be getting to some proper car reviews in the not too distant future, so do stick around for those as well. Otherwise, if you want to check out that battery replacement and coding episode, then check that one out in the end cards, and plenty of other how-tos and reviews on the channel as well. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and we'll see you all next week.